Maya sat alone in a quiet corner of the tavern, her back leaning against the cool, aged wood of her chair. She sipped her drink, simple iced tea, slowly, savoring the moment. Maya wasn't the kind of person to draw attention to herself, but something about her presence seemed to ripple through the room. The muted chatter and occasional bursts of laughter from the other patrons barely registered to her. To anyone else, the room might have felt lively, but to Maya, it was just noise, fading into the background of her thoughts. Unlike the other patrons, Maya noticed the group of men as soon as they entered. They moved with purpose, their heavy boots hitting the wooden floor like a drumbeat. There were 5 of them, rough-looking and loud, their postures radiating arrogance. The leader, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a long scar etched down one side of his face, scanned the room with a sneer that made people look away. He carried himself like someone who didn't need to speak to demand attention. Maya remained still, her expression calm. She took another sip of her tea, her eyes briefly flicking toward the men. She noticed everything, the way they carried themselves, the subtle gestures between them, and the leader's quiet confidence that came from years of getting what he wanted through force. But she didn't react. She rarely did. Her gaze dropped back to her drink, as though she hadn't noticed them at all. The scarred leader caught sight of Maya sitting alone, and something about her calmness seemed to irk him. He leaned over to one of his men, muttering something under his breath before giving a slight nod in her direction. His gang laughed, their grins spreading as they followed his lead. They moved toward her with slow, deliberate steps, the sound of their approach cutting through the bar's noise like a blade. Maya felt their presence before they reached her table. The leader stopped in front of her, towering over her seat, his shadow stretching across the wooden floor. He leaned in close, his scarred face twisted into a smug smile. The stale smell of alcohol and cigarettes lingered on his breath as he spoke. "You're in my seat," he said, his voice gravelly and cold. "Move." The men behind him chuckled darkly, their laughter spreading through the room like a wave of unease. Maya stayed still, her face unreadable, her hands resting lightly on the table. She didn't look intimidated. Her stillness wasn't submission. It was something else entirely. Something deliberate. She lifted her gaze to meet the leader's, her expression calm but firm. "I didn't see your name on it," she said evenly, her voice quiet yet strong. The man's grin faltered for a split second, but he quickly recovered, leaning in closer. "Don't make this hard, lady," he said, his tone sharper now. "Get up, or I'll make you regret it." The bar had gone silent. Every set of eyes was on them now, watching to see how Maya would react. The tension in the room was thick, and even the air seemed to hold its breath. Maya didn't move. She placed her glass down gently, the sound of it touching the table louder than it should have been in the quiet room. Then, with the same calm precision, she stood. She wasn't tall, but the way she carried herself made her seem larger than she was. Her movements were deliberate, her posture steady, like a coiled spring ready to release. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. The scarred leader smirked, stepping back slightly. "You think you're tough?" "Huh," he sneered, his tone dripping with mockery. "You think you can take on all of us?" The men behind him chuckled again, but their laughter was nervous now, uncertain. They had expected fear, but Maya gave them none. She just stood there, her gaze unwavering, her body poised like a fighter waiting for the bell. The leader's smirk faded into something colder, more calculating. He straightened, cracking his knuckles as he glanced over his shoulder at his gang. "Looks like we're going to have to teach her a lesson," he said, his voice low and dangerous. The gang moved closer, their circle tightening around Maya. But she didn't flinch. She didn't waver. Instead, she shifted her weight slightly, her stance strong and grounded, ready for whatever came next. Without warning, Rex, the scar-faced leader, lunged at Maya with his full weight. The force sent her stumbling back a step, but she didn't fall. Gasps rippled through the bar, the crowd of onlookers now riveted to the unfolding scene. Despite the sudden shove, Maya recovered almost instantly. Her body, conditioned by years of training and experience, reacted on instinct. She planted her feet firmly, her stance grounded as she steadied herself in a heartbeat. The world around her seemed to slow down as her focus sharpened. Every movement she made was deliberate, precise. What happened next was something no one in the room expected. Her calm demeanor shifted into fluid, razor-sharp action. It was like watching a well-practiced routine, every motion executed with flawless precision. Her arms moved in a blur, her fists like coiled springs unleashing their power. With a single, devastating punch, Maya's fist connected with Rex's jaw. The impact was sharp, clean, and the crack echoed in the suddenly silent room. Rex's expression turned from smug confidence to shock as his knees buckled. He crumpled to the floor, unconscious before he even hit the ground. The gang stood frozen, their leader sprawled out at Maya's feet. The silence was deafening. Their collective confidence evaporated in an instant as they stared at the woman who had just taken down their leader with one decisive blow. The other patrons, who had been holding their breath, seemed equally stunned, their gazes locked on Maya. Maya remained composed, standing tall and calm, her chest rising and falling with measured breaths. She didn't need to say anything, her actions spoke volumes. But she chose to break the silence anyway. Her voice, steady and unwavering, carried through the room. "You made a mistake," Maya said, her tone cutting through the tension like a knife. "I'm not someone you can push around." The gang exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier bravado replaced by uncertainty. They had walked into the bar brimming with arrogance, expecting to intimidate and dominate. But now, the tables had turned completely. The air felt heavy with their hesitation and fear. Before they could decide on their next move, Maya shifted her weight slightly, her stance unmistakably that of a trained fighter. She wasn't just standing her ground. She was prepared for anything. The calm woman in the corner was gone, replaced by someone who clearly knew how to handle herself in a fight. "Do you really want to test me?" she asked, her voice low but filled with quiet power. It wasn't a threat. It was a challenge. One of the gang members, emboldened by his desperation to save face, rushed forward, aiming to catch her off guard. But Maya moved faster. She sidestepped his clumsy attack effortlessly and sent him sprawling to the ground with a swift kick to the back of his knee. He yelped in pain, clutching his leg as he fell. The next man, a hulking figure with tattoos covering his arms, came at her swinging wildly. Maya ducked beneath his punch with ease and countered with a hard jab to his ribs, followed by a sharp uppercut. He staggered, his eyes wide with disbelief, before collapsing onto the floor. The largest of the group, a man built like a tank, charged her with a roar, his fists swinging wildly. But Maya was already moving. She sidestepped his attack, her movements fluid and precise. Before he could recover, she delivered a quick combination of punches to his midsection. He doubled over, gasping for air before crumpling to the ground. One by one, the gang members fell, their confidence shattered along with their pride. Only one remained standing, a wiry man who had been the loudest earlier. Now he hesitated, his bravado replaced by fear. He took a step back, his hands raised defensively. "You're a boxer, aren't you?" he stammered, his voice trembling. Maya's gaze locked onto his, her expression unreadable. After a moment, she gave a small nod. "I've been fighting my whole life," she said simply. Her tone was calm, but her words carried the weight of truth. "You should have thought twice before messing with me." The man's face paled, and he took another step back. His eyes darted to his fallen comrades, then back to Maya. Without another word, he turned and bolted for the door, his fear carrying him out of the bar as fast as his legs could manage. The room remained silent for a beat, the crowd processing what they had just witnessed. Then, slowly, applause broke out, hesitant at first but quickly growing. Patrons clapped and cheered, their admiration for Maya evident in their expressions. The once chaotic scene had turned into a moment of awe and respect. Maya, unbothered by the attention, turned to the bartender, who stood frozen behind the counter, his mouth slightly open in shock. She tilted her head toward her empty glass. "I could use another tea," she said casually, as though nothing unusual had happened. The room remained silent for a few moments, the applause slowly fading as the reality of what had just happened settled in. The gang, battered and humiliated, struggled to their feet. Rex, groaning as he held his jaw, glared at Maya with a mixture of pain and disbelief. He stumbled backward, gesturing weakly to his remaining men. "Let's get out of here," he muttered, his voice slurred from the force of her punch. The other gang members didn't argue. They limped toward the exit, casting wary glances over their shoulders at Maya. The fear in their eyes was unmistakable. They knew they had tangled with someone far beyond their league. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving the tavern eerily quiet once more. Maya watched them leave, her expression calm but alert. She exhaled slowly, allowing her body to relax as the tension drained from the room. The bartender finally broke the silence, clearing his throat nervously. That was something," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "You okay?" Maya turned to him and nodded. "I'm fine," she replied, her tone even. "But maybe next time, you should keep an eye on who walks through your door." The bartender nodded quickly, still too stunned to say much. He grabbed a fresh glass and poured Maya another iced tea, sliding it across the counter with a small, awkward smile. "This one's on the house," he said. Maya offered a faint smile in return, lifting the glass and taking a slow sip. She turned her attention back to the room, where the other patrons were still staring at her. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd, and someone called out, "That was incredible. Are you some kind of martial artist or something?" Maya chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Just someone who knows how to defend herself," she said simply. Her words were humble, but her actions had already spoken louder than anything she could say. One of the braver patrons, a young woman with wide eyes and a notebook in her hand, stepped forward. "I've never seen anyone move like that," she said in awe. "Can you teach me?" Maya looked at the woman for a moment, considering her request. She saw something familiar in the woman's eyes, a spark of determination, the same fire that had driven her in her own younger years. After a brief pause, she nodded. "Meet me here tomorrow," Maya said. "Early. If you're serious, I'll show you the basics." The woman's face lit up with gratitude, and she nodded eagerly before returning to her seat. The rest of the patrons gradually went back to their drinks, the energy in the room shifting from tense to electric. Everyone who had witnessed the fight knew they'd be talking about this night for years to come. Maya leaned back in her chair, sipping her drink as if nothing had happened. She had come here to enjoy a quiet evening, and while it hadn't gone as planned, she couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. Sometimes, she thought, life had a way of reminding you of your strength, not just for yourself, but for those who needed it most. As the bar slowly returned to its usual hum of conversation, Maya sat quietly, her demeanor calm and unbothered. Yet beneath her composed exterior, she felt a sense of renewal, a reminder of who she was and how far she'd come. She glanced around the room, catching the occasional whispered admiration or wide-eyed glance in her direction. She wasn't one to seek attention, but in this moment, she allowed herself to appreciate the respect she had earned. The bartender, still visibly shaken, approached her again, this time with a nervous smile. "You know, we don't get people like you around here often. Next time someone causes trouble, I'm calling you instead of the cops." Maya smirked, shaking her head. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," she replied. "But you might want to think about hiring a bouncer." The comment drew a ripple of laughter from the nearby patrons, and the mood in the room lightened. A few brave souls approached her to thank her or ask questions about her past. Maya answered them sparingly, keeping most details vague. She wasn't here to relive old battles or bask in the spotlight. Her purpose had always been to move forward, not dwell on what was behind her. As the crowd gradually settled back into their routines, Maya glanced toward the young woman she had agreed to train. The girl was scribbling furiously in her notebook, a determined expression on her face. It made Maya think of herself years ago, when she too had been hungry to learn, to fight, to prove something to the world and to herself. Finishing her drink, Maya rose from her chair, the quiet scrape of wood against the floor drawing a few final glances. She left a tip on the counter and gave the bartender a small nod. "Thanks for the tea," she said simply. Stepping outside, The crisp night air greeted her. For a moment, she stood beneath the dim glow of the streetlights, gazing down the empty road. She thought about the fight, the gang, and the way the evening had unfolded. It wasn't just about proving her strength. It never had been. It was about the quiet resilience she carried, the refusal to let the world define her worth. With a deep breath, Maya adjusted her jacket and began walking. The road ahead was long and winding, but she felt ready for whatever came next. Tonight had reminded her of one undeniable truth. Strength wasn't just in the fists. It was in the spirit, the courage to stand tall in the face of any challenge. And Maya knew her journey was far from over. As the bar behind her grew smaller in the distance, a faint smile crossed her lips. She had left an impression, not just on the gang or the patrons, but on the world she had chosen to quietly protect. And she would continue to do so, one step, one fight, and one quiet victory at a time.